Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming, and a special thanks to Ms. Williamson for graciously accepting our invitation to come to campus and sharing your perspective with students and the greater Dartmouth community. I'm Ella Klinsky, an executive board member of the Dartmouth Political Union, the preeminent, nonpartisan, student-led political organization here on campus. The DPU has joined with the Rockefeller Center to co-sponsor this event series, The Path to the Presidency. For today's program, we have asked Ms. Williamson to make some remarks, respond to some moderated questions before taking questions from you, the audience. But first, a little bit of background on Ms. Williamson. Marianne Williamson is a notable American author, spiritual leader, and activist who has made waves in both the literary and political realms. Her career began in the 1980s, during which time she became deeply involved with HIV and AIDS activism, as well as being a longtime champion for the LGBTQ+ community. In addition, she founded Project Angel Food to deliver meals to the homebound, unable to shop or cook for themselves. To date, the charitable organization has served over 16 million meals. She also founded the LA Center for the Living, the Manhattan Center for the Living, and co-founded the Peace Alliance. Over the years, she has lectured to hundreds and thousands of people on both spiritually and politically progressive topics and sold over 3 million books. With a distinctive blend of spiritual wisdom and political insight, Williamson first entered the political spotlight by running for the Democratic nomination in the 2020 presidential election. Her platform focused on progressive policies, advocating for healthcare reform, economic justice, and climate change mitigation, all informed by her holistic and compassionate approach to governance. In a bold move, Williamson is once again challenging President Joe Biden for the Democratic nomination in the 2024 presidential election. As an essential part of her platform, Williamson proposes a 21st century economic Bill of Rights, a Department of Peace, reparations for slavery, and she declares she's going to end America's drug war. In addition, as a progressive Democrat, Williamson proposes a new economic beginning, including universal health care, tuition-free college, and tech school, and a guaranteed living wage. She also wants to declare a climate emergency and ensure a just transition from a dirty to a clean economy. Please join me in a warm welcome for Ms. Williamson.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here, across from Nelson Rockefeller up there. Nelson Rockefeller was a pivotal character in American politics. Of course, he was vice president at one point. Back in the time when I was growing up, when there was this thing called liberal Republicans. So it's pretty interesting to be here in a place founded by him for nonpartisan conversation, and I think nonpartisan conversation is very important right now. I have heard it said, there is a saying that you can live your life one of two ways. You can live your life out of circumstances, or you can live your life out of a vision. And today, particularly when we think of our collective experience and our political conversation, we are inundated by circumstances, challenging circumstances, stressful circumstances. And it has led us to a point where we're constantly playing whack-a-mole. We got to fix this, we got to fix that. We got the climate emergency, we got Ukraine, we've got wealth inequality, we've got hunger, we've got so many things that we are all struggling with. And our conversation is pretty shallow, to be honest. It is a product of very late 20th century thinking. Talk about the symptoms, don't go into any root causes because that might be inconvenient to the power structure. And basically the idea is a product of the Newtonian model, very mechanistic mindset of the 20th century, where the world is a big machine. If you have a problem with anything in the world, you just tweak the machine. Well, the vast majority of you are not 20th century people. That's why I find it so fascinating that Gen Z is now such an important political demographic. You're 21st century people. And among other things, Gen Z people that I meet don't understand, and I agree with you. Why should you have to live your lives at the effect of bad ideas left over from the 20th century? There was a British physicist named James Jeans who said, as it turns out, the world is not one big machine, the world is one big thought. In order to transform this world, we have to rethink it. And that's why the line, you can live your life one of two ways, either according to circumstances or according to a vision, is practically and politically relevant If all we do is talk about circumstances, we will not be able to heal this country, repair this country, or even recognize how broken it is. But if we talk about vision, then we can have the beginning of an intelligent, meaningful, transformative conversation that just might take us somewhere. In order to do that, I think we have to go back to the beginning, because that's where our national vision was first formed. I'm sure some of you are history students, but even if you're not history students, we all know the basics of this part of American history, and that was the signing of the Declaration of Independence. July 4th, 1776, 56 very brave men signed that document. And that document infused our country with the basic philosophical foundation of our country. And those men were very brave, actually, because if the British had won the war, they would have all been executed as traitors against King George of England. And with the signing of that declaration, they were infused into, once again, the founding of this nation, the formation of this nation, extremely enlightened ideas and extremely radical ideas. They were radical in 1776, and they are radical today. Very morally relevant, spiritually relevant, as well as politically relevant. And they form America's mission statement. And just as with an individual, when you have a mission statement, when you have a company that has a mission statement is important. You keep going back to it. You revisit it. You align your thoughts with it, your commitments, your intentions, your attitudes. It brings together the different members of a system, whether it has to do with a company or a country. Okay, this is the things on which we agree to agree. And part of what the problem is with the Declaration of Independence today is that for too many generations, we're not really taking it into our hearts. It's not enough to just print these principles on parchment and put them behind glass somewhere or to inscribe them on marble walls. In the Jewish religion, it says that every generation must rediscover God for itself. And I think with the Declaration of Independence, we need to revisit it and to take it into our hearts. In fact, Abraham Lincoln said, it is an eternal rebuke to forces of tyranny and oppression. What were those main principles? Number one, it is considered self-evident that all men are created equal. Once again, we see how radical it was. In 1776, it was overthrowing centuries ancient regime, entitlement of a king, a queen, divine right of kings, the king and the king's rich friends, the aristocracy. Sound familiar? And they were entitled to basically the resources, whatever resources they wanted, and everybody else in the society was little more than a serf in obeisance and servitude to those upper classes. And then it says that God gave all men inalienable rights of life and liberty in the pursuit of happiness. Now, I think in today's language, that would be God gave everybody the right to self-actualization. That's very radical. Radical in 1776 and radical today. Third, governments are instituted to support those rights. Once again, radical then, radical now. The purpose of government is to support and to secure. That's what it says. Governments are instituted to secure your right to self-actualize. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and then it gets really juicy. It says that if government is not doing that job, that it is the right of the people to alter it or to abolish it. That's our mission statement. Now, what happened there in 1776? That's where it all started. Radical, wonderful, enlightens, world-changing. But that's also where it got gnarly, because 41 of those 56 were slave owners. So what that means is that we have always been both and. We're not either or, we're both and. We have been in every generation, starting at the beginning, both those who are willing to sacrifice, even sacrificing the possibility of their lives for ideals that are ablaze with infinity of possibility for the human race. And we have also had forces within every generation from the beginning who, for their own financial and/or ideological purposes, had no intention whatsoever of seeing those principles materialize and have proven throughout our history in the most heinous ways they would do whatever it took to make sure that they did not. That's the story of America. That's the bipolar nature of American consciousness. That's our DNA. It's baked into the cake. Now, every generation, even ours, lives out that struggle. And when you see your own circumstances within the larger historical dynamic of that struggle, you see things from a much more expanded lens. So how have we responded to that over time? Well, the way we responded to it over time is pretty well. The arc of the moral universe has, though long, bent towards justice, because generations before us responded to slavery, an obvious transgression against the principles of the Declaration of Independence, with abolition. And generations before us responded to the institutional suppression of women, an obvious transgression against the Declaration of Independence, with the women's suffragist movement and the passage of the 19th Amendment. And other generations responded to the overreach by the capital of the Gilded Age, an obvious transgression against the principles of the Declaration, with the establishment of organized labor. And generations before us responded to segregation in the American South, an obvious transgression against the Declaration, with the establishment of the Civil Rights Movement. I'm running for president because it's our turn now. I'm running for president because we're living out the same struggle. But today, it's not one institutional reality. It's not a cancerous tumor that can be excised. It is rather an economic paradigm which is like a cancer that has already metastasized. And it is the root of our problems today. It is not one institutional reality. It is a matrix of corporate power. It is a matrix of corporate power, from insurance companies to pharmaceutical companies, big food companies, big agricultural companies, big chemical companies, big banks, big oil, gun manufacturers, and defense contractors. And they represent a matrix of power which is institutionalized corporate greed. It is a cancer on our society. It basically owns our government. And at this point, the only hope we have is for the people to step in. How do we do that? We do that with a revolution at the ballot box. And there will be a revolution in this country. As John F. Kennedy said, those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. 20% of us are doing just fine in today's economy. And that is something to be celebrated by those of us who are in that 20%. But everybody here also knows what's going on in this country over the last 50 years. Over the last 50 years, there's been a massive transfer of wealth to the tune of $50 trillion away from 90%, the bottom 90% of Americans. Now, those of you who are students here might think that I'm just talking about a fairy tale. You might think that what I'm about to describe, while you might intellectually know it's true, you think, oh, certainly that must be hyperbole. This can't be true, even though you know it is true. But let me tell you, just in case you haven't visited it recently, just in case you haven't really taken it in, I'm going to describe to you a land far away. It was called the 1970s. And let me tell you something about the 1970s, okay? The average American worker had decent benefits. The average American worker could afford a home. The average American worker could afford a car. The average American worker could afford a yearly vacation. The average American couple could afford for one parent to stay home with the kids if they wanted. And the average American worker could afford to send their kids to college. Not true today. Not even close to being true today. Today, 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. 70% of Americans report living with constant economic anxiety. 1 in 4 Americans live with medical debt to the tune of an $88 billion medical debt. Although we should also point out that while Americans have an $88 billion medical debt, if you put together the 5 top pharmaceutical companies in the United States, their profit last year alone was $80 billion. Our seniors, half of our seniors live on $25,000 and less a year. 1/3 of America's workers live on less than $15 an hour, and half of them cannot find a place to live. 1.3 million Americans ration their insulin, and a high percentage of our 600,000 homeless people work full-time. Now, that is not a thriving middle class. That is a destroyed middle class. We don't really have much of one anymore. Now, unfortunately, everything that I just described is the way America works now. It's kind of baked into the cake, that those conditions are sort of collateral damage. Now, one party doesn't seem to think there's anything wrong with that, and the other party is now guided by the corporatist element of that party, which really finds it unfortunate, those things, man. It's really sad. I remember Bill Clinton saying, "I feel your pain." And in that party, in that corporatist element, which is represented among others by President Joe Biden, they are willing to do everything possible to ameliorate the stress of people, as long as it doesn't undercut or challenge the underlying corporate forces who actually make the return of those pains, of that suffering, inevitable. And why? Because of the economic tyranny of those corporations which form that corporate matrix. Ever since Citizens United particularly, they have a grip, they have a hold, they hold our government hostage. And at this point, when you look at the political media industrial complex, it's not just that this political media industrial complex chops wood and carries water for those corporate forces, they are corporate forces. So that at this point, our governing principle is no longer democracy. Our governing principle is no longer humanitarian values. Our governing principle is short-term profit maximization for huge multinational corporate forces. And those soulless economic forces have now replaced democracy, replaced any sense of ethical responsibility, safety, health, and well-being to the American people as America's bottom line. I'm running for president because that system will not disrupt itself. And according to our Declaration of Independence, if government is not doing its job of securing our inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, then it is the right of the people to alter it. It's our turn. If abolitionists push back, women's suffragists push back, early labor organizers push back, the civil rights movers push back, who are we? What are we doing? Why are we so seduced? Why are we so numbed out? And a lot of the seduction has to do with places like this and those of us who have made it in America. And then the game is, well, we want you to come in because you're really bright and you're really smart. We want you to come in. We need you to run the machine. And then if you start complaining at any point, I think this is unfair, they say, what are you complaining about? You made it. You went to Dartmouth. You've made it. What are you complaining about? But American dream is not just that you can make it. The American dream is not just that I can make it. The American dream is that we are the keepers of an extraordinary ideal. I have a friend who is a documentary filmmaker. She was born in Lebanon, and she grew up in Norway, and she's a very successful documentary filmmaker about very, very serious subjects and has met with many, many world leaders. And she said to me that she was very surprised at one conference. She went around asking some of the world leaders that she worked with, what keeps you up at night? What really frightens you the most? And she said she was surprised what the answer was from many people who she knew are critics of the United States in many situations. But when she asked them, what scares you most, what keeps you up at night, they gave an answer that surprised her, and yet it was common among them. The answer was that America will go down. So we have an awesome responsibility on our hands. We need to save this thing. And yet we all know we're 6 inches from the cliff. Now, some people, even in my own race for the presidency, for the nomination, say, Marianne, how can you be doing this? Don't you realize the fascists are at the door? Oh, yeah, I definitely realize that. That's why I am doing this. And I'll tell you something. They should never have gotten this close. Something's real wrong that they ever got this close. And I agree with Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, when he said, we will not have to worry about a fascist takeover in the United States as long as democracy delivers on its blessings. If democracy was delivering on its promises, hello, we would have what they have as in every other advanced democracy plus. It's called universal health care. There wouldn't be 1 in 4 million Americans living with medical debt, 18 million Americans unable to fulfill the prescriptions that their doctors give them. I've had 2 doctors, one a doctor in Detroit and one a cardiologist in Texas, and they both told me something that was the same thing. The woman who is the doctor in Detroit said, 15 years ago, if I was seeing a patient and I told the patient what I wanted their medicine or their treatment to be, their common question would be, what are the side effects? Today, the most common question is, how much will it cost? The cardiologist said the same thing. He said, I don't even know why I bother to practice medicine anymore. There are so many million Americans who their insurance will cover the visit to the doctor, but it won't cover the operation, it won't cover the medicine, it won't cover the treatment. In every other advanced democracy, they have universal health care. Not only that, but you know what? The majority of Republicans as well as Democrats want it. In every other advanced democracy, they have tuition-free college and tech schools. Why don't we? We had it until the 70s. We had it at University of Florida, University of Texas, and University of California. The reason I think we should cancel the college loan debt is because it should never have existed. It's predatory. You don't behave in a predatory manner against your young. That is unnatural. So not only is it the job of government to support people thriving, to support self-actualization, but the last people you should be exploiting are your young. But where's our right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness when there are so many carcinogens in our food? Where's our right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness when there are so many PFAS in our water? 46% of the American urban water supply filled with these forever chemicals. Where's our right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness when we know what is happening with the climate crisis, and yet we have a president who is supposedly the most liberal among them, who is giving more oil drilling permits than even Trump did, who is okaying the Willow Project, as well as the U.S. Defense Establishment, which is the single largest institutional emitter of greenhouse gases on the planet. Where is our right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness when millions of Americans are praying when they drop their children off at school that my child will not be shot today? Or that child who is also an American citizen, where's their right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness that they themselves are praying that they will not get killed today? And where's the right of those millions of American children who are in schools where there aren't even the adequate resources to teach a child to read by the age of 8, which means that that child's chances of high school graduation are much less than their chances of incarceration? What about their right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? And on and on and on and on. That's why we need a revolution at the ballot box. That's why there's no time left. We are 6 inches from the cliff. Now, the political system, the political establishment, the pseudo-intellectual elite would have you believe that the only people you should trust as qualified to drive us out of this ditch are people whose careers have been ensconced in the car that drove us into this ditch. And that's what I disagree with. I think that the fact that you've been ensconced for years in the car that drove us into this ditch disqualifies you more than qualifies you. Because they are 20th century, not all of them, there's some really good people who work in Washington. This is not about individuals, this is about systems. But when you have people who say, oh, you need to know how to be a political car mechanic, that's not the problem. We have plenty of political car mechanics. You hire them. The problem is that we're on the wrong road. The fact that somebody's a good car mechanic doesn't mean they have any idea necessarily which road you should be taking to San Antonio. Roosevelt said that the biggest job, the most important part of the presidency, was not administrative, but rather moral leadership. Franklin Roosevelt also said that a necessitous man is not a free man. Franklin Roosevelt said that he had what he called 4 freedoms, and 2 of them were freedom of, and 2 of them were freedom from. The freedom ofs, of course, we know. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the right to protest. Tell the people down in Atlanta that. But also freedom from. And the freedom from is the freedom from want and the freedom from fear. The Overton window has moved so far to the right in this country that sounds like some crazy left-wing talk. Nelson Rockefeller would have a hard time even getting into the Republican Party today, and Franklin Roosevelt, I'm afraid, would have a hard time being taken seriously within the Democratic Party. I grew up at a time when the left had a spine. And I also remember that Eisenhower said that the American mind that is left is both liberal and conservative. There are high-minded conservative principles and there are high-minded liberal principles, and we should recognize all of them. Nobody owns this country. There's no one anywhere who has a monopoly on truth. The fact that someone doesn't have a basic agreement with you about politics, that doesn't mean they don't have some good ideas. I'm certainly left of center, but I have very intelligent conservative friends. I read books by some very intelligent conservatives. Even when I don't agree with their conclusion about something, I often learned a little something about their analysis and how their analysis of a situation informed my own. So I think that we need to come out of our silos. We need to come out of our silos, and enough is enough with you're a Jewish American, a Christian American, Muslim American, gay American, straight American, non-binary American, transgender American, white American, black American, brown American. Enough. Not that these individual identities are not important, because they are. But you know, in alchemy, there's this concept of separatio. And in separatio, you separate out the elements to perfect them, but only so they can join together at a higher level. That's the first principle that John Adams wanted us to revisit. Out of many, one. And we're living at a time when what comes after that hyphen is deeply important. We need to come together now and talk about America. We are responsible for something. We are inheritors of a very, very profound ideal. We don't want this to go down on our watch. And we don't want to see this thing go so far that we can't even imagine pulling back from the brink and feel maybe we could have done something. But it's also a very sobering realization that they're not going to. The Republican Party, the corporatist core of the Republican Party, in my opinion, is a nosedive for our democracy. But the corporatist element of the Democratic Party represents a managed decline. We're headed for the iceberg. We're headed for the iceberg we need to turn around. The way the Republican Party acts today, it's a straight line for the iceberg. The way the corporatist Democrats act, we get there more slowly and we hit it at a different angle. I say we need to turn it around. And the generation of those of you in college now have an extremely important part to play. You're 37% of the voting electorate in this next election cycle. You're very, very important. And a place like this, Dartmouth, great elite institution, this is a vortex of power here. This is where you incubate ideas. This is where you listen. This is where you box. You know, you box with God, you box with each other, you box with ideas. This is a time when you can do that. And I believe that it's your civic responsibility. Hear me, but also hear Biden. Hear Bobby Kennedy. Hear Cornel West. Hear the Republicans. We all owe it. This is not a moment when we should say, oh, well, I know what I think, so I don't agree with this person. This is a time of such crisis where politics should be, you got any good ideas? You got any good ideas? You got any good ideas? That's what it should be. We're becoming numb. We're becoming, people have just been sort of beaten down. And people are in decline into depression and anxiety. We can't let this happen. We have to wake each other up. You pray in the morning, you kick ass in the afternoon. That's what we have to be now. It's not just about what we need to do, it's about who we need to be to pull this off. And I'm sure that the abolitionists had desperate days. Sometimes I hear people say, I just find this moment traumatizing. I find politics traumatizing. Do you think the people who walked across the bridge at Selma weren't traumatized? You think the women who marched for suffrage and for no other reason were thrown in prison for that? And the conditions in the prison were so awful that they went on a hunger strike? And the response of the prison officials was to send men into their cells and force these metal contraptions on their necks and force feed them. You think they weren't anxious? We need to toughen up, buttercups. We need to hold each other's hand, and we need to spend whatever time we need to during the day to cry, to bemoan, to worry, and then get up and get dressed and get out there and get active. Other generations did it, and in many ways, they did it for us. We have a vision. We have a vision, the Declaration of Independence, and we have to have a vision of a possibility for your future. And an idea grows stronger when it's shared. We have been trained to limit our political imagination. Can you imagine what this country will be like when nobody's worried about health care? Can you imagine what this country will be like when we really know that our food is healthy? You know, there are American companies that produce a product in the United States, and they have to produce it with other ingredients in other countries because other countries will not allow that carcinogenic crap in their nation. Can you imagine what this country will be like when everybody knows that they can have a decent, dignified job on just one job? Can you imagine what this country will be like when people don't have to worry about childcare? Can you imagine what this country will be like when nobody's worried about anything, sending their kids to school? When people aren't worried, scared of gun violence? Can you imagine what this country will be like when we're not afraid of a climate that is in such catastrophic trajectory that we don't know when the next flood or tsunami or wildfire might affect us? Can you imagine? Because we need to imagine. And the fact that they've tried to strip us of our own capacity to imagine is the worst crime of all. But nobody can take that from us if we won't let them. We've been trained to limit our imagination. We've been trained to expect too little. And we've been trained in our political conversations to be so shallow. In our individual conversations, we go deep, and in politics, we're like sixth graders. We just spew narratives that are handed down to us from the PR centers of the Republican and the Democratic Party. If we're going to have a peaceful society, it won't just be because we try to get rid of violence. It will be because we claim a peaceful world, a nonviolent world. So as Martin Luther King said, we need some external shifts in our circumstances, but some internal shifts in our souls. That's the moment to me. That's the zeitgeist to me. It's something different. It's breaking the cord that ties us to a 50-year aberrational chapter of American history. Call it trickle-down economics, call it neoliberalism, call it whatever you want. It should end now. And you will not have the future that you could otherwise have if you don't join with those who want to end it. Let's end what was and begin again. If we just come to that point of intention and willingness in our own hearts and in our own minds, there will be a political breakthrough in this country. There were political breakthroughs before. The abolitionists did it, the women's suffragists did it, the early labor organizers did it, the civil rights workers did it. As I said earlier, it's our turn now. Let's do it. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.
This one, sorry, just because of the mics. Thank you so, so much for those remarks.
Thank you.
We really appreciate it. I know so many students have questions, so I'm gonna keep this quite brief. But I wanted to start out where you contested the nomination in 2020, and I'm wondering what propels your decision to challenge an incumbent president from your own party at this juncture? In what ways do you believe you'd be a better leader than President Biden?
You know, this thing has been made of the fact that he's an incumbent president. There's nothing in the Constitution that goes there. This is a modern thought form. He's the incumbent president of your own party. This is like, show me in the Constitution where it says anything about that. George Washington, in fact, warned us of political parties. He said in his farewell address that it would form factions of men more loyal to their party than to their country. Yes, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Roosevelt Democrat, but my loyalty is not to my party. My loyalty is to my country. John Adams saw political parties as the worst threat to democracy. And the way those guys are behaving today, there's something to think about there. So this idea of challenging the incumbent, they say that, and we all inherit it. They say that as, oh, you can't do that. Why? What is this? Why are we talking about this? Even when they say, oh, Teddy Kennedy, he challenged Carter, and then Carter lost. Carter lost to Ronald Reagan. He didn't lose to Teddy Kennedy. So I just don't buy into that. And I'll tell you something else about what you just asked. That is the horse race. That is the horse race. The horse race is not what matters here. That's what I mean about our being trained to think a certain way. It's not about the horse race. It's about the highest level of poverty. of any advanced democracy. It's about the fact that the majority of Americans live with economic anxiety and despair. It's about things that are much bigger than that. I reject, he's an incumbent president. He's a nice man. This is not personal. But that's exactly the level of conversation that should not slow us down.
And then I heard you mention about economic issues, and I know you asserted that our economic system currently falls short of our democratic ideals. So can you outline the adjustments you propose, especially your 21st century economic Bill of Rights, and what that would look like?
One of the things I already talked about here today is that the promises of democracy, as Franklin Roosevelt would call them, are afforded to the citizens of every other advanced democracy. Primary among them, universal health care, Medicare for all. The fact that we don't have it is not because of it's complicated. We have it because it's corrupt. It's the institutionalized greed of the insurance companies. Just like the carcinogens in your food are because of the institutionalized greed of the food companies. And the rationing of insulin is because of the institutionalized greed of the pharmaceutical companies. The climate crisis, in large part, because of the institutionalized greed of the big oil and the institutionalized greed of the defense contracting industry, which has dominated so much of our foreign affairs. So my economic plan is an economic U-turn in this country, because everything that I talked about has been at the expense. That's the problem. Stockholder capitalism, I'm not an anti-capitalist at all, actually. I believe in the hybrid economies that you see in many places in Europe, but there should be a concern for the common good in this country. The basic philosophical principle is supposed to be that government brokers a balance between individual liberty, which includes financial, economic liberty, and a concern for the common good. So I want to balance this. The common good has been sacrificed so that a very few Americans can make money. Making money is a good thing. My concern is that too many Americans never got a shot at it. And no conscious person wants to feel that they're creating wealth at the expense of other people getting a chance to. So I want the basics. I want universal health care. I want to cancel the college loans, loan debt, because those loans should never have occurred. I want to see tuition-free college and tech school, which, as I mentioned, we had before the 1970s. I want free childcare. I want paid family leave. I want guaranteed sick pay. And I want a guaranteed living wage. I also want a Department of Peace. I want a Department of Children and Youth. And I want to end America's war on drugs.
Wow. And I know you just mentioned about tuition-free college and tech schools, and I think it's especially prevalent on a college campus. And I'm wondering—
That would not apply to Dartmouth.
So yeah, so this is going to be my question. What would that look like in your opinion, and like how would you finance that?
Well, there are different ways to do this, and on all of these issues, whether you're talking about colleges, whether you're talking about healthcare, there's so much to be gained from looking at what other countries do and how they do it. Even on healthcare, it was a little bit of how Germany does it, a little bit of how England does it, and so forth. When it comes to college, I think Australia has a very compelling system. This is what they say. You go at the state colleges and universities that are part of the program, you go to the highest level of educational achievement that your own work takes you, okay? When you get out of college, the government has a record of how much money you're making. And when you are making a level of money where your standard of living is considered good enough, it starts paying itself back a little bit every year. Simple enough. As you make more money, and you start paying it back to the government. Some people never will, but the vast majority of people will, and it's a win-win for everyone. Our economy will be so much greater. Our economy will be so much larger when more people are educated, because the more educated you are, the more you can self-actualize, the more you can create your own business, your own products, be the entrepreneur that system says is so wonderful, and they're right. But when you have, I tell you something, I don't know what the situation is here with college loan debt, but I can't even imagine being in my 20s with tens of thousands of dollars of debt. I can't even imagine it. Debt is crippling. Debt is crippling. But to have that kind of debt, as millions of Americans do in their 20s, Once again, then you wonder where this mental health crisis comes from. You know, the American dream used to be that you would own a house. The American dream for millions of people right now is to get out of debt before they die.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, there's so many questions I could ask you, but I know that students and the audience have a lot. So for those here in person, like, I want to start the audience Q&A. Please wait for a microphone to be passed to you so we can broadcast your question to the online audience. And if you are online, feel free to email your questions to rockyq&a@dartmouth.edu. And that could be the word and or the ampersand. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah, the boy in blue.
Hi, Marianne. I'm Nacho. My question to you is, why have other Democrats like Bernie Sanders, who stand for many of the ideas that you're running for and who have like a similar redirection for the country, backing Joe Biden? And again, I think particularly Bernie, and how do you think that has affected?
I'm a little hard of hearing, so I'm going to come and stand close to you so I can see your mouth.
Yes.
Okay? Okay.
So I was
Tell me
asking
again.
how many of the Democrats who share many of the ideas that you're running for, why have they supported Joe Biden, and how do you think that has affected your campaign? Who, like, many of these people share the same ideas for a redirection of the country. Like, why haven't they been able to walk the walk and like vouch for you?
Well, obviously I can't speak for them.
Yes.
My sense with Bernie is that, you know, he is an institutionalist, which I respect. He's a U.S. Senator. My sense, and once again, I can't speak for him, but he seems to believe that what's important now, because it's true, if we had passed the Build Back Better bill, I don't think I would be here. And I think his sense seems to be that if we can just get more Democrats in the House, pass the Build Back Better bill, that will do it, and that's our best shot at repair. Obviously, I disagree with the senator, but I revere him greatly. I also don't understand how are you going to push him left by endorsing him so early. I don't understand that. My sense of AOC, and once again, I don't know, but based on the way she expressed herself, I don't think she knows who I am. I don't think there's a lot of, you know, there's a phrase, contempt prior to investigation. And it is very applicable to many people about me. People who have not read my books, who talk about my books. People who do not know my work talk about it. There's been such a purposeful, I must say, mischaracterization. But they seem to think, and I also think there's something else. And this is very relevant to our conversation. There's something about, and this is not personal to Bernie or to AOC or anyone. There's something about being part of that system. They get sucked in. There are many people who are congresspeople, governors, and senators who agree with everything I've said here tonight. Why aren't they here? Why do I have to do this? Honestly, why do I have to wake up every morning to insult and smear and hit pieces and erasure and invisibilization? Do you think this is fun, really? I mean, this part is fun, but this is not in any way the totality of the experience. Where are those people? Well, you know, they're doing what the DNC says. So wait a minute. So if Gavin Newsom or any of them get in over the next few weeks, we're supposed to believe you didn't have the courage to take on the DNC, but we're supposed to believe you have the courage to take on the insurance companies? Or Big Pharma? Or Big Oil? Or Raytheon? Or Northrop Grumman? Or Boeing? There's a system there. Some really good people are part of the system, but to me, your question is a demonstration of how the system operates. It will not disrupt itself. And that's why I said, if it's going to happen, it's going to come from us. And even as a candidate, it's going to come from somebody on the outside. Does that make sense? That's how I see it.
Okay. Yeah, I'm also happy to repeat the question so the whole audience can hear it. Let's do over here in front. Right.
Hello.
You can stand up.
So how would you improve workers' rights? Would that include the incentivization of worker co-ops? And if so, how would you go about that?
Well, first of all, it's very exciting what's happening now. The first Gilded Age was responded to with the establishment of organized labor, and we're in the middle of a regeneration, revitalization that's truly profound and very exciting. I was on the picket line in Detroit the other day, the UAW. My current hero is Shawn Fain. I think he's just amazing. I want to be the political Shawn Fain. I think it's just amazing to hear him. I have great respect, Christian Smalls, all of them, whether it's taking on Jeff Bezos, taking on Howard Schultz, taking on the big three. I think it's the only way that we are going to course correct a malevolent strain of capitalism, unfettered capitalism, and the damage that it's done. It's going to take an inside-outside strategy of electoral politics and organized labor. I support the PRO Act. I support a sectoral bargaining. I support a beefing up of the NLRB. The president has done some of that. I think Lena Khan is great. But there would be, if I were president right now, I was at Detroit, I was on the picket line, and the president did get there. I certainly would be there as well. And workers' co-ops, something's happening in this country. You know, we are living in two worlds simultaneously. It's almost like there are two attitudinal universes. One world is falling apart, and another world is struggling to be born. And what you were seeing, you know, one of the things for me when I was in Detroit last week on the UAW picket line, and you can see some of this if you go to my social media, I have a couple of videos from my time in Detroit on the picket line, and one is an interview with 3 retired auto workers who are union guys. And it's really wonderful hearing them talk and how excited they are to see young people getting excited about labor. This is really a big deal because when Ronald Reagan and Reaganomics and trickle-down economics, all of that started, part of the strategy was demonizing unions. Now that's not to say unions didn't have some of their own malfeasance, et cetera, but it was part of the strategy. So I would be, you know, I know President Biden calls himself the most pro-union president, but nothing like me. If you're really pro-worker, you pass Medicare for all. If you're really pro-worker, you fight for that minimum wage. The president ran in part on raising the minimum wage. Well, at that obscene number of $7.25 an hour. And I remind you, by the way, in having this conversation, that in the majority of American cities, a living wage is at least $20 an hour. So the president did make $15 an hour minimum wage for federal workers. But then when it came to putting that $15 an hour into the COVID relief bill, he was stopped by the parliamentarian. The parliamentarian has no actual political power. And I assure you that no Republican president allows himself to be stopped by the parliamentarian. When the parliamentarian challenged George Bush, he fired the parliamentarian. So there are a lot of ways in which he used that, you know, as a convenient excuse. So I believe that in being pro-worker, part of that will be, in addition to such things as the PRO Act, sectoral bargaining, worker co-ops that you mentioned, NLRB, it will also be fighting for Medicare for all, minimum wage, and a guaranteed living wage, really. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and then we have a question actually from online. How would you suggest we control or eliminate guns in America?
How do people what?
How would you suggest we control or eliminate guns in America?
Well, the situation is such that we're living in a moment of possibility. The majority of Republicans as well as Democrats, including the majority of gun owners in this country, want common sense gun safety laws. Things have gone so far, even in some red states, that you have some red governors who now say, yes, we should have universal red flag laws, that did not say that 10 or even, I don't even think 5 years ago. Obviously, I would want an assault weapon ban. Everything that we all know to be true, whether it has to do with bump stocks, high-capacity magazines, all of those things, the boyfriend laws, the risk, the time between purchase of a gun and able to actually procure it, and so forth. We know what needs to happen. But I have to say something. The goal should not be the elimination of guns. We have to respect, and I think that if you want to get right-wingers bristling, you use language like that. There is a Second Amendment. You start messing with the Second Amendment, they're going to try to mess with the First. So let's be very careful here. It should not be, we should not see that as our goal, the fact that the founders said that, you know, the citizens have the right to bear arms, but you have a right to drive too. There's still traffic laws. And you still have to take a test, and you have to pass that and get a license. And that should be much stricter. But I don't believe that I'm very different on guns than any other Democratic president who have tried, and some of them have tried very hard. And during the midterms in the Clinton administration, it was very sad. Some very, very fine people lost their jobs because they stood up for the assault weapon ban. You know, one of the powers of the presidency that I would use, hopefully to great effect, but I would certainly use it passionately, is the bully pulpit. And I believe that this is an area where, as president, I would seek very hard, not only to make these external changes, but to have a conversation with the American people, which enabled us to harness that majority of Republicans, Democrats, and gun owners, so that more people would be in Congress. Listen, no matter who you are, no matter who the president is, you are hoping for a House and Senate that will align with you on the agenda items that matter most to you, and guns would be one. But you know, sometimes a politician will say to you, I want to go to Washington and fight for you. I don't want to go to Washington and fight for you. That's not my idea of a good time. But I want to go to Washington and co-create with you a better America. And in order to do that, this has to be something we do together. The forces that would mitigate against our having safer streets are in Concord as much as in Washington. They're in Sacramento, they're in Austin. In order for this country to genuinely, fundamentally transform, all of us need to begin to see politics and political activism as simply a layer of a well-lived, meaningful life. No more thinking, well, I'm doing enough if I vote every 2 years. Or certainly not if you think it's enough to just vote every 4 years, because corporate lobbyists, including the NRA, are in the offices of these people every hour of every day. So I would do my best, but you're going to have to elect a whole different breed of Congress and Senator and Congressperson and Senator to get that one done.
Let's continue. Over right next to you, Cooper. Yes, right there. You can take the mic, please.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Williamson. I'm obviously a little older than most of the audience here. I came up through Vietnam and civil rights movements and all of those eras. And I've heard a lot of candidates and a lot of presidents, sitting presidents as well, make some wonderful promises and plans and goals to have them shot down and blocked by obstructionists in the Congress, the legislative that holds the purse strings, obviously. And we've seen it in the theater just this last week, was ridiculous in the way they play this, where a small group of only 10 obstructionists can hold the country hostage. How would you, as president, deal with this type of obstructionism and this type of blockage to the great ideal goals that you have?
We all took 8th grade civics, hopefully. We have 3 co-equal branches of government. The president does not have a magic wand. And you actually don't want the president to have a magic wand. And like I was saying before, no matter who the president is, there was a time towards the end of his presidency, which of course turned out to be towards the end of his life, where Franklin Roosevelt talked to Wendell Willkie about forming another political party. He was so frustrated by the racist Southern senators that were holding him back. That's just part of the way the game is played, but that goes back to what I said before. That has to be something we do together. And that has to do with the fact that all of us are responsible for the kinds of congresspeople and senators you have. And for those of you who are Democrats, you've got to get involved on the primary level, no matter who you are, Democrat, Republican, or whatever. You can't just wait for election day. That's why I'm talking to you today. The primaries are urgently important. And there are corporatist elements who not only suppress someone like myself, candidacy of someone like myself, invisibilize, erase, blackball, all of that. They do the same thing on the congressional level. They do the same thing on the senatorial level. So all of us have to get in there. So it's not just how would I deal with it, it's also how would you deal with it. You know, Obama had the House and the Senate and the White House. We had it for 2 years. Obama and you know, he had that for 2 years, and Biden had it for 2 years. So I think for the Democratic Party, it's not just what are you going to do with obstructionists, with the Democrats, what are you going to do with the power when they give it to you, guys? Because with the Republicans, modern Republican presidents abuse the power of the presidency. Modern Democratic presidents will come up with excuses like, well, we didn't get a mandate, so we're going to wait until the next term. To the Republicans, we won the election, that's our mandate, and they're right. So one of the things you would see me do is I would not pussyfoot around with the powers of the presidency. I would not abuse, I would not overreach, but neither would I be this kind of milquetoast person with all this performative stuff to make you think I understand what you're saying, and I would do things like invest in green energy over here, but actually give more oil drilling permits over there. Or even like Obama, who would say certain things, and with Obama, there were things which if a Republican president would do it, we would scream bloody murder. If Obama did it, we'd go, oh, poor baby, they wouldn't let him, when there was no evidence he had tried. And that's what the modern corporatist Democrats do. Their playbook is to tell you what you want to hear. And so you assume they're going to do certain things. So I would use the power of the presidency. I can't override Congress, except to veto, of course. And you use executive orders where you feel it's necessary. And you also use the bully pulpit. I would lay it down and be as real with you as president as I am as a candidate. And then many of those things, my conversation would be such that I didn't get it done this time. I didn't get it done in my 4 years. But by having this conversation with you, I hope you are preparing yourselves to be more effective at taking the baton from me after those 4 years. I would not be able, in my term, to turn the ship around, but I do believe with all my heart I could get us around the curve and then hand it over to you. Does that make sense?
Okay, we only have time for one more question.
Would that be this lady here?
Sure.
Hello, thank you so much for the talk. You mentioned the Department of Peace.
Yes.
And maybe the biggest threat to the world's peace right now is Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022, 2014, Georgia in 2028. So, and in one of your interviews, you mentioned that the war in Ukraine will end with negotiations. What for you are acceptable terms of ending Russia's invasion? And do you support continued US aid to Ukraine?
I'm not sure I heard everything you said, but you asked about a Department of Peace and you asked about Ukraine. Yes. A Department of Peace, peace building is a real thing. It's a specific set of skills. There are 4 factors which statistically mean that when they are present, there will be a higher incidence of peace and there will be a lower incidence of violence. And this is true whether it's a corner of an American city or another corner of the world. Those 4 factors are the following: greater economic opportunities for women, greater educational opportunities for children, reduction of violence against women, and the amelioration of unnecessary human despair. That is how you strategize peace. Martin Luther King said there's negative peace and positive peace. Negative peace is where there's no outright violence, but there's an underlying tension and anxiety. He said positive peace can only be predicated on brotherhood and justice. So a Department of Peace is about strategizing a world at peace. We need to imagine a world 100 years from now in which there is no war and reverse engineer. Just like we play war games, we need to play peace games. And so the issue here is that while some people would say that someone like myself is naive to think that we could even do that, I say what's naive is to think the species will even survive another 100 years if we don't at least try. Just like we have a military academy, we can have a peace academy. A military academy is where people are trained to wage war most effectively, should we feel that that is necessary. And then that education, they pay that education back by being available to do so should their country need them. The Peace Academy would be the same. You pay us back for that education by being part of this. It's almost like the Peace Corps 2.0. The Peace Corps is, we're going to send you somewhere, do what you can. But the strategizing of peace and a Department of Peace would be about strategically working to undercut the conditions, the root causes of violence, so that violence does not even erupt. Now, about Ukraine. There is a US war machine, and it's a snake, and we have to cut the head of it off. There is a blob. There is a way in which the Pentagon is merely the piggy bank of Northrop Grumman, Boeing, and Raytheon. It is absolutely absurd, and it would never happen in my administration, that our current Secretary of Defense is a former board member at Raytheon. It is ridiculous, the price gouging of the Pentagon, well established by 60 Minutes, which apparently does a much better oversight than the US Congress does. One of the first things I would do is have another audit of another one of every penny of the Pentagon, and I'm sure they would fail. I am very hip to this. I want at least a 10%, hopefully beginning at a 20% reduction in the US defense budget. Added to that, I understand we poked the bear. I understand that we were irresponsible about NATO. I understand that those Aegis missiles in Poland should never have been there. Having said all that, none of that to me justifies the atrocious behavior of Vladimir Putin. To me, the military is like a surgeon. If America needs surgery, you better believe we need the best surgeon. And should we have the best surgeon on hand, you better believe, and we do need that. But a reasonable person tries to avoid surgery. At the same time, there are times where surgery is deemed necessary. And I do not, we were talking about this earlier. I think a lot of this comes to a gut call. A lot of this comes down to a gut call, what you think of Vladimir Putin. Some people say the United States should withdraw all military support. We should call for a ceasefire. First of all, should we support a negotiated settlement? Of course we should, and passionately. It is the only answer. There was a meeting in Saudi Arabia a few weeks ago. This is a multipolar world now. It's not unipolar. The United States does not call every shot. So you have to have the United States, China, Brazil, India. They were all there. But I support a negotiated settlement in which there is still a Ukraine to negotiate. So I actually resent it when I'm called the war candidate, and a couple of my opponents are called the peace candidate. Because when you were talking about just the immediate withdrawal of all US military support, I assure you, what we would then see would be anything but peaceful. Vladimir Putin would love it. And if anybody in this room thinks he'd be fine, cool guys, let's all stop now. You stop, we'll stop. I think it's absurdly naive to think that that's what Vladimir Putin would do. If we were to, at this point, withdraw all support, he would simply crush Ukraine. Now, some people say, Marianne, you're wrong, this is all he wants. We've heard that one before. And there was Crimea, then he takes a beat, then he comes for more. Yeah, he might take a beat. But if you talk to people in Latvia and Estonia and Lithuania and Finland and Sweden, even on the left, they don't see him the way many Americans do, who in my mind are apologists for Putin in a really bizarre way. If you were an anti-imperialist, and I am an anti-imperialist, we should all be an anti-imperialist. It's like anti-thievery. But I call out my country when I feel it's an imperialist venture, such as Iraq, such as the last 20 years in Afghanistan, but I equally call out Vladimir Putin. And I supporting Ukraine in the ability to negotiate at a time and in a way where Ukraine as a sovereign nation has a chance to exist. Ukrainians would not be fighting the way they're fighting if they were nothing but tools for the US State Department. That's how I see it.
Yeah. Well, with this final minute, I would like to give you an invitation if you have any final remarks.
Thank you.
Like to share.
Well, I would just say, number one, that I'm grateful. And I know it sounds a little romantic, but I'm very aware how fortunate we are. I'm very aware that there are countries where if I, particularly as a woman, made even a fraction of the criticisms of my government that I have made here today, that I would be hauled off, possibly tortured, even killed. So I think it's kind of like when you go to therapy and you have to look at some of the things you've done wrong, but it's important that the therapist's there to remind you you didn't do everything wrong. And when you're talking about all the great things you've done, that the therapist is there to remind you, you didn't do everything right. And I think we have to hold America that way at this time. We have to remember that we haven't done everything wrong. And that despite even the things we have to look at now and identify as real problem solvers, even in problems in our past even, let's identify with the problem solvers. So I'm very aware of being in an early primary state. I think it's exciting being here. I have talked at many colleges and universities, and for all the reasons that I've already spoken, I'm really happy to be with younger people who weren't even of the 20th century and are so ready because that's the age we're at. Could we just start over, please? I'm with you. Could we just start over, please? Let's have a new beginning. Let's have a season of repair. And I feel that as president, I can help get this started. And I'm grateful to be in New Hampshire because New Hampshire, regardless of what the DNC is doing with their shenanigans, they cannot strip New Hampshire of its significance. They could strip me of delegates, but they can't strip you of your significance. So if you believe that there is a reason for this campaign to exist, you don't have to decide today. You don't have to decide until January who you're going to vote for. But I appreciate your giving me this opportunity. I appreciate those of you here at Dartmouth in your official capacity. Thank you for inviting me. It's a long job interview. That's what a political race is, and you're interviewing candidates, and this is how it should be. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell you what I would do with the powers of the job if you put them in my hands. If you do feel moved and you do want this campaign to exist, I assure you that the institutional resistance is greater than you even know. And I'd appreciate your help. I'd appreciate you going to Marianne2024.com, signing up. I appreciate your telling your friends. I appreciate your following on social media, create buzz. If you have time and bandwidth, help us call bank, volunteer, do canvassing with us. Something incredible can happen here. And I think the country is ready. There's a critical mass of Americans who know something's wrong. We have to do something different. And now it's a matter of being ready to actually do that. If you think I have a part to play, please help me. Thank you very much.
And again, we appreciate it so much. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you again.
Everyone. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.